Welcome to the Conscious Breathing Podcast. I'm Irina Lee and I've been invited to be a guest host for this episode, where I'm joined by the founder of Conscious Breathing, Mr. Anders Olsson. Welcome.
Thank you.
And the author of the now very global famous book, Breath, Mr. James Nestor.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to be sitting here with the both of you, and let's just dive into it because we have a lot to talk about and go into the nitty-gritty details.
Yeah.
Mr. Anders, or I'll just call you Anders.
Please do.
So tell us, why are you so excited to be here today?
Well, when people ask me what I do, I tend to think of myself as a breathing nerd. I'm really interested in the subject because it has helped me so much, and that is where I came from. I got help to calm down, get out of my racing mind, and just found a great tool, and then I wanted to spread it to others.
Yes, and it has spread. We can definitely say that your knowledge has spread, and very much thanks to the amazing work you have been doing, James, for the last few years. So how did you fall into the breathing experience?
It wasn't a conscious decision, actually. It was just a number of events happened over a number of years, including my own respiratory issues, just like this is how most people discover breathing.
Definitely.
Is when something goes wrong. And then I got interested in it journalistically to write something about it. And very early on, I stumbled across this website for conscious breathing, Anders' website. And I thought, some of this seems legit and some of it seemed really crazy.
Right.
So what I did, what I usually do, instead of just drawing my own conclusions from that, was I called him up and had an interview, actually a number of interviews, just to try to suss it out. I don't know if he knew that was happening, but I was trying to figure out, is this guy insane or is he really onto something?
Because the claims that he presents also in his book, Conscious Breathing, they're pretty extreme when you first look at them, and we'll get into some of them. But before we dive any way further into this, I was hoping, Anders, that you could maybe take us through a little breathing exercise. And for those of the listening back home, they could join us as well. Is that okay? Can we start there?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'd love to.
So now when this is recorded, it's still like early in the day. What would you suggest that we could do?
We can do the breathing anchor. What I find is that a lot of people would love to have a tool to just calm down, just as I wanted, get out of the racing mind and just be grounded here and now.
Are you okay with that, James? Should we be grounded?
Let's do it. I love it.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is very simple. You just close your eyes, close your mouth, and you put your tongue in the roof of your mouth, and you prolong your exhale slightly. So you think that you breathe twice as long on the exhale as on the inhale. And you can also close your eyes if you want to. You can have an erect posture, and then you visualize an anchor going lower and lower and lower down into your body. So you're basically taking the elevator. For every prolonged, slightly prolonged exhale, you're taking the elevator down. From your head, your attention goes down into your body, and you're connecting your brain with your heart brain and your gut brain. And you become present, grounded, relaxed. You may feel that you're breathing low and slow and rhythmically. And the key to this is the nasal breathing and the prolonged exhale. You may feel that you're activating your diaphragm, your most important breathing muscle. Welcome back.
Wow. Now you can continue this journey.
Right.
So this is probably one of the many things you discovered, how you can change your state by changing your breath. Tell us, do you use this technique, the breathing anchor that Anders just showed us?
I do, yeah. And I think that so many techniques, if you look at ancient yoga practices or qigong or whatever, have the same general premise of extending the exhale, shortening the inhale, and calming the body down. Yeah. What's interesting is if people don't believe that that is something that is actively working on their bodies, you can just look at simple measurements of your heart rate. You can look at nervous system function, heart rate variability, even brain waves, and see how just shifting your breathing over a few seconds can have such a profound effect.
That's just one of the many, many nuggets that people can read about in your amazing book, Breath, which now has been translated and sold to over 35 countries. That's amazing. Congratulations.
Thanks.
Do you ever kick back and wow, I did it. I'm successful now?
I wish I had time to do that. Haven't really had time in the last couple of years. I view this as an extension of research that had been going on for a long time. Yeah. So maybe I'm adding a bullhorn to people, researchers like Anders, like Yandel Henderson, like Carl Stow. So many people for so many years have been studying this stuff. And as a journalist, I was able just to sort of come into the story as this wave was starting to crash and people were becoming more aware of it. Right.
Because like you mentioned, and like you also mentioned, Anders, many times, this is not something new. You mentioned the yoga tradition. There are, documents that or proof that this is practices that are going back thousands of years. So it's, yeah.
Yeah, this is nothing new at all.
Right. Yeah. But that's why it's so amazing that storytellers, and like you yourself, Anders, you've also written the Medveten Andning, or Conscious Breathing, the book in English, and now the book that's now available through James's work in so many countries all over the world. We need storytellers, right? We need people who can bring this knowledge forward to the general public.
Yeah, exactly. That's my job. If I'm not able to communicate the stuff clearly to people who are young and people who are old and everyone in between, then I've completely failed. So I write for a general population. Right. And so much of this stuff is very technical, which is why so many people haven't ever heard about it or considered it, because it's all hidden away in academic journals. Right. And so my job and Anders' job is to spend months and months and years reading these extremely boring academic journals and trying to find the story and create pieces of the puzzle to form a larger picture.
As a journalist myself, I'm definitely the newbie when it comes to breathing. I fell into this world at the start of the pandemic, of course, where I physically felt that I need to do something about my breathing patterns, because I was never afraid, but I was ridden by anxiety, right? And that goes into your breath immediately. I mean, you could probably put me in a state of panic by giving me what would I need to do breathing-wise in order to get a panic attack here and now?
Well, I think commonly when you look at a panic attack, the breathing is high up in your chest and it's fast. And what you do then, you get rid of carbon dioxide. So we inhale oxygen, and then we are basically like carbon dioxide factories. These mitochondria in our body, they convert the food we eat together with oxygen into energy plus carbon dioxide. And then we exhale the excess carbon dioxide. So when we have this fast and shallow breathing, we upset the oxygen-carbon dioxide balance. So we get too much oxygen and too little carbon dioxide. And if you come to the hospital with a panic attack, you get a bag to breathe in and out through. And the reason why it works...
Like a gray paper bag that we've seen in the US movies when they hide their alcohol bottles, that kind of bag, right?
Exactly, yeah. And the reason why it works is because you exhale about 100 times more carbon dioxide than you inhale. And when you exhale that into a bag, then you will rebreathe it, right? when you have the bag in front of your face. And that means then that you will increase the carbon dioxide pressure in your body. And the reason why you get calmer then if you have a panic attack is because carbon dioxide has a relaxing and widening effect on the smooth muscles that surround the airways and the blood vessels. So this panic brain is actually starved of blood and oxygen. So when you then increase the carbon dioxide pressure, you open up your airways, open up your blood vessels, so the panic brain can get oxygen and blood.
Which is kind of paradoxical in what we are taught. Everyone thinks that more oxygen is what we need, but it's actually increased levels of CO2, carbon dioxide.
Yeah, in my view, it's carbon dioxide that paves the way for oxygen, opening up the airways, opening up the blood vessels, so that the oxygen that we need so desperately, that it can reach the cell.
I mean, we talked about this many times. Anders calling himself a breathing nerd. Like the level of knowledge that goes into this and the advancement of this knowledge, taking this and making it more, available to the public. Tell us a little bit about that journey. How has that been for you to translate the science language into common language?
It was awful. It was a terrible journey. I'm being totally sincere. You could talk to 10 different doctors about the same thing, and they're going to give you 10 different responses, and they're going to ridicule the last person you talk to. So at the end of a month-long process of trying to get to the truth of something, you're at the same spot as you began. So there is very little consensus in the medical community, so you don't know who to believe. Even in medical textbooks, I heard this from a few doctors. They said 50% of what we've known about medicine in the past has been proven wrong. And today, 50% of what we know about medicine will be proven wrong in the future. So you have to go back. What I try to do is first look, these interventions, will they harm us or not? If they have no negative side effects, then that seems something worth exploring, right? What's the worst thing that can happen to you? I wasted a little time on something that didn't work. It's okay, rather than having something very bad happen to you. So that's one of the reasons, there are many reasons, but one of the reasons that breathing was so interesting to me, because from what I found, there are no negative side effects to learning how to breathe better, right? There's a lot of negative things that can happen when you're breathing dysfunctionally. So just starting with that, it seems like this can only benefit people. And from what I've seen, it can massively transform people's health as well.
And we're going to dive deep into that, because when we say it can transform their health, we're talking about every part of their body. I mean, I even think that male probably can regrow their hair if they breathe correctly for long enough. I don't know.
Just look at me.
No, but we're talking about eyesight. We talk about smelling sensory, like probably how you can hear, your ability to taste stuff, the construction of your throat, your body, your weight, your sex life, your feet. Everything is connected to breathing. So, I mean, let's take it from the top down. So I was thinking about, because I fell into, like I mentioned at the beginning of the pandemic, and I discovered first your book, and through your book I discovered Anders' work. So I became a student of his work, and I wanted to do one of your exercises, Anders.
Okay.
If everyone can raise their right index finger and close off the right nostril, just lightly pushing your right nostril. You don't have to put it inside your nose, just outside of it, that's fine. And just then breathe gently through your left, now open nostril. Let's take 3 breaths. No particular rate. And without any further ado, just change the nostril, close off the other one. 3 more breaths. And just check which nostril is open for you right now. I don't know if everyone has gotten a sense on this, what nostril is open for you?
This one, the right one.
The right
more
nostril
open.
is more open. Is it a big difference or is it a subtle difference?
More a subtle difference, yeah.
What about you, James?
Right by far.
Right by far. So it's the left is definitely more closed right now.
Yes.
So for me, also the left, a little subtle. I had to check a couple of times because it wasn't clear. So left open for me, right for you, James, and for you it was also the right. So what does that indicate? Who wants to answer this?
Well, there is science saying that there is this lateral connection between the right nostril has a connection to the left side of the body and the opposite.
No, the right nostril being connected to the left side of the brain, but it actually connects to the right side of the body as well.
Okay.
So the switch happens above the nose.
Yeah.
So the right side being open for you guys, that implies that you are more in a sympathetic state right now, which is a little bit more, what should I say, forward-leaning, awake, aware, alert.
Yeah.
And for those of us who have the left side more open right now, we're a little bit more relaxed, more in a state of the parasympathetic nervous system response. That is a little bit more, laid back, not afraid right now.
Yeah.
And that's so interesting, the shift between the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. You've written about this in your book extensively as well.
Well, as far as the relationship between the nostrils and our states, I think it has more to do with the nostrils stimulating those different states rather than the nostrils being a reflection of those states. And so what the going theory is, the reason why our nostrils will switch throughout the day, every 30 minutes to 3 to 4 hours, will become right nostril dominant or left nostril dominant. Sometimes they're both open pretty equally, but then it goes back and forth. A lot of people think that that is to keep the body balanced, which is why when you have a cold or when you're sick, that pattern gets much quicker and dysfunctional as the body tries to catch up and balance and tries to find what your body needs at that time. Which there's some hypotheses that suggest that one of the reasons that our noses will get congested at some times is to help restore our balance of carbon dioxide too. But what we do know as an absolute scientific fact is breathing, forcing yourself to breathe through one nostril or another will elicit certain reactions in the body. So right side is associated with heat, increased heart rate, increased blood pressure, stimulating. That this is the sun nostril, according to yogis. And then you have the moon, the feminine energy, which is stimulating the right or creative side of the brain and is calming you down. Blood pressure goes down, heart rate goes down. We know that through studies. What we still don't know exactly is why our bodies do this automatically. They do their alternate nostril breathing on their own. And I think it's pretty obvious that there's a reason why we have developed these abilities, but still scientifically that hasn't been proven. But I think that you can deduce why we've evolved to be able to do that.
But also probably add that there's no better or worse. We need both.
Just like everything else.
Just everything.
The yin and yang.
The yin and yang, the masculine and the feminine. You mentioned the yoga tradition with the sun and the moon. So how often do you check your nostril breathing, Anders? Like, what state am I in?
Never, actually.
Never?
No.
Never?
No.
What about you, James? Do you do it?
Never, no, because your bodies are automatically doing that. I do some alternate nostril breathing when I want to get into a certain state. That's hacking your body's own biology, what it's naturally doing. But I very, very rarely check.
That's interesting because someone told me, like, what if you started checking and take that into consideration? So you're supposed to do something that requires, I don't know, being very forward-leaning, right? But my nostril says I'm pretty calm right now. Maybe I should wait 30 minutes.
But I don't know if it's a reflection of your state or if your body is doing that to balance you in the future, right? I don't know if it's an exact, like, heart rate and blood pressure is a reflection of your state at that moment, right? And I haven't seen no science that suggests that your nostrils will dictate whether or not you're sympathetic or parasympathetic.
So, which brings us back to how the two of you met, and we just discovered it was 2017, so it's probably 5 years ago at the time of this recording.
Yeah, I remember the first time we we talked. It's actually 5 years almost to the day. You know, you called me up, and we had some email before. I felt, as you described earlier, you were a little lost, right? You had so many conflicting information from different sources, and I think I confirm that as well, that view, that a lot of people have different opinions, but in general there is little knowledge, more opinions. And anyway, you came here we spent a few days together, and I thought I wanted to see what you're made of, because I had read your book Deep, which I was really impressed about, and I thought, oh, this is an adventurer. So I put you, do you remember I put you in the carbon dioxide suit?
I remember.
The BodyStream, which is this suit, but at the time it was more like a prototype. So the neck seal, for example, this is made of silicone, but yours, the one you tried, it was made of latex. So it was very tight around the neck, and I don't think it was a very pleasant experience for you, right?
Well, it was interesting because we had talked on Skype for a number of times.
Yeah.
I had read your book, and I was impressed by the amount of actual scientific references in it. So there's a lot of new agey sites that make all of these outrageous claims, and you're like, okay, where's the proof? There is none. But Anders took the time to actually document. And so it's like, if you don't believe this statement, why don't you look at the study that was done? And so I spent a lot of time looking at that. I said, this stuff may be legit, but there's nothing like actually going and meeting someone. And still in this day and age, I hesitate on just including people in my work through phone conversations. You have to go and hang out and figure it out. And we came here to this same, not only to Stockholm, but to this office. Like, I remember hanging out here. And this was a very early interview that I was doing, so I was still new into the breathing world.
Yeah.
And a conference room right over there. And it looked like a mad scientist lab. I mean, there was a smell of plastic smoke. Things were exploding. There were sparks.
They were exploding. I was expecting the fire alarm to go off.
There was general misery. We were doing self-experimentation. Things quite weren't working right. I felt completely ecstatic and then had a severe headache. And I said, this is the real stuff. This is how science and discoveries happen. He's right about the
putting your own life at risk.
Well,
that's what I do.
know.
That's what I do.
But you tried another product as well, right? The Carbohaler, where you inhale carbon dioxide. And at the time, that was the thing that exploded. And it started to puff out smoke. But I remember you got one second you could get 1% CO2, and the next second you got like 10, and that is a lot.
That sounds extreme.
But the thing is, you really wanted to try, right? You're the curious guy who wanted to try for yourself.
Well, I had read so much research about inhaling carbon dioxide, and Anders is Mr. CO2 here, about how it's so essential to the body, having a balance of it. And there's very legitimate research looking into CO2 therapies and anxiety and panic and even epilepsy. And I wanted to try it, but there are no machines you can buy. So what does Anders do is he goes out and makes one himself.
He invents
And of course that process is going to take a while. You're going to screw up along the way for years and years and years until you find a way into it.
So for those of us who might not be as risk trigger happy, is that what you call it?
Sure.
Adrenaline junkies. So you have done some other inventions, Anders. I want to talk about the sleep tape, which was also something I discovered earlier in my journey. So I know you brought some sleep tape with you here today, and
it's this little.
And just before we start the recording, you just said, James, I gotta get some more of those sleep tapes because I ran out of it. So when did you, James, start taping your mouth?
It's a good question. I don't know the exact time I started doing it. I remember very early on, Anders had given me some of this stuff, and I thought it was pretty crazy. I tried it. I hated it. I could not
why
sleep
did you
with
hate it?
Because it's stupid looking. I mean, it looks ridiculous. Why would any animal need to tape their mouths shut.
Have you ever seen a dog?
Night.
Have you ever taped your dog's mouth?
No, I would never do that to my dog. So I did not understand the issues behind sleep disordered breathing and mouth breathing at that time, and how they can cause such serious chronic illnesses, mental problems, physical problems, and more. I didn't know that. I thought that this was more of a lifestyle choice. Like, hey, it's better to breathe through your nose, which seemed reasonable, but I did not take it too seriously.
So now, I mean, you have tons of videos on YouTube, you teaching other people how to tape their mouth, taking them on a gentle journey. If anyone wants to go research, go check out YouTube, James mouth taping. So in your book, you explain it, like put it on as a Charlie Chaplin, a mustache. Others refer to it maybe as a Hitler mustache, but whatever preference you like. That's how you started, right? Putting it across your lips.
Yeah, and those videos are by no means an authoritative view on mouth tape. What I try to state very clearly is I've tried to use a zillion kinds of tape. I've tried it many different ways. This is what worked for me, but it doesn't mean it's going to work for you, okay? This is what I've come to. People say it's impossible to wear mouth tape because you have a beard, so I'm not going to do it. Totally wrong. I found a way of doing it that works for me. And so what I was trying to express to people who are hesitant about taping their entire mouths, or they have beards, I said, what worked for me is using just a little piece of tape.
Yeah.
And I did not hear a lot of people talking about this. If you look at YouTube as well, under mouth tape, there's some people that use 7 or 8 different strips every single night. They do this. That works for them. I find it complete overkill. So I found these little edges of this mouth tape here worked just fine for me,
They're
and
just
I
like
would
a
cut them up.
centimeter wide, just like a
take this off
half. Would that have been inches? Like not even
Yeah.
a quarter of an inch.
This can work for a lot of people because all it is a reminder. You're not hermetically sealing your mouth shut. This is the technology. Are you ready for this? It's going to blow your mind.
I'm ready.
This is what took me years to figure out. Here it is.
Oh my God.
Look
You
at
can
that.
hardly see the tape on
Does
the
this
mouth.
look dangerous to you? Like I'm going to die?
It's extreme.
It comes off that easy.
Yeah.
At any time, it comes right off. So when people tell you, oh, mouth taping, you're risking death, they have no idea what they're talking about.
I have a clue why they might think so.
Why?
Because I've seen pictures of Anders online running half a marathon with a full-on, what we call in Scandinavia, gaffa tape.
Duct tape. Yeah.
Duct tape,
yeah,
like he's
yeah.
typing his head from ear to ear,
Yeah.
and that looks extreme. Anders, why on earth did you run half a marathon with half of your face blocked off? Your nostrils were open though.
They were indeed, yeah, luckily. Well, I just wanted to try, and I mean, if you want to get some attention, you should probably not use this one, which can barely be seen. So obviously everyone thought I was completely out of my mind, but people also paid attention, right? So I wanted to get that message across. How am I breathing when I'm running here? And a lot of athletes, it turns out that they don't have a clue about their breathing, which is really, really interesting because it lays the foundation, right, for the oxygenation of your muscles and your nervous system so that you are able to perform in your sport.
So what you're saying, I could actually tape my mouth. I don't need to use the duct tape, but I could actually do nose breathing for whatever sports I'm doing, probably.
Yeah, and you don't need to tape your mouth. That was just a fun thing to show people.
It was a showstopper. It
Yeah.
definitely grabbed some attention. You made headlines all over Scandinavia with that one.
Yeah, well, I mean, in my view, yeah, you can train that ability to use your nose predominantly, whatever activity. Well, swimming may be a bit hard. I've tried crawling with nasal breathing. I lasted for 25 meters, and then it took me probably 5 minutes to cough up the water. So maybe not swimming, but in all other sports I've tried, it's really possible. A lot of it has to do with the mind, and I think the same is with the tape at night. And if someone is worried about taping, I suggest tape for a few evenings just to get used to the sensation.
And even before you go to bed?
Yeah, before you go to bed. Yeah, that's what I mean, yeah. To tape for 10, 15 minutes. But the same, it's a mindset and an idea we have that, oh my God, I can't breathe all of that air I'm taking in when I'm doing physical activity. It's impossible through the nose. But what we do is that we replace quantity with quality, because the nose helps you to keep the airways open. So you drive the air further down into the lungs. When you, like most athletes I see, still today when I'm out jogging, I have only met one person, I think, that does the nasal breathing. All other, they look like this, really forceful breathing. And what happens then is that the airways get irritated and they get more narrow, so you automatically force the air higher up in your chest. And that is not very efficient, because we have like a snorkel from the nose and the mouth all the way down to the alveoli, and that is called in medical terms the dead space. There is no action. We want the air we inhale to reach the alveoli, and if we're breathing higher up in our chest, there is not so many alveoli here. They're located further down in the lungs, most of them. So that means we are moving most of the air just in and out of this snorkel, this dead space. So then we have to compensate by breathing faster. It's like driving our car and having a foot on the brake, and we have to compensate by pushing harder on the gas pedal. So when you do nasal breathing, you are able to drive the air to the lower parts of the lungs. So that's why you're able to do your activity with less amount of air, less breathing. So you're replacing quantity with quality.
I love the fact that by duct taping your face, this knowledge gets out to people.
Well,
so we need to use whatever means we
yeah,
have available,
that's what
right?
I figured, yeah.
Perfect.
Well.
And because this is what you guys didn't stop at taping your mouth or trying to inhale carbon dioxide in higher amounts. You actually went to Stanford. And that is, like, can we say, I don't know the American term, but there is like this story that goes around the story. You know, what do you call it? The red thread or something. Like, and you and Anders going to Stanford is definitely like one of those follow-through stories in your book, Breath. Mm-hmm. Tell us about that insane experiment. How did that come along? How did you even get permission to do something crazy as that? What did you do?
Well, when I was researching the book, I imagined this experiment was going to be almost a footnote in the book. It was going to be a very small part of one chapter, at the end of one chapter, of just personally experiencing what Anders and I had both studied for years.
Yeah. What
are the differences between mouth breathing and nasal breathing? How does that make you feel? How does that affect athletic performance? So people who study this know the differences. The science is very clear that there are profound differences in the quality of sleep, even focus, athletic ability again. And so we were curious to experience this personally, having read so much about it. I had begun a friendship with Dr. Jayakar Nayak, who I had interviewed numerous times at Stanford, because I live in San Francisco. Stanford is quite close. And he liked this idea, and we really wanted to get a bunch of people involved. I said, you're a nose guy. He's one of the leaders in the world of rhinology research. He had no money for it, could find no money for it. So he's like, you can use my lab, I'll cut you a deal, but you have to pay for this study. Right. So, and at Stanford, that is not cheap. Trust me, trust Anders on that. So so I signed up. I was like, okay, I'll just do this experiment, and it'll be this kind of funny thing that will be included in the book. Then I thought about it, said a one-person experiment means basically nothing. Like, you need at least two people. Not as though two people, that means a ton, but it means a lot more than one person.
100% more, right?
So yeah, 100% more. That's a big difference. I remember asking Anders about it.
Yeah, I was thinking, who can I call? Like, let me look at my Rolodex. Who can I call to join me for this human experiment?
I asked him, and I introduced the idea, and he's like, yeah, that sounds terrible. And we just kind of left it at that, after especially everything you know about nasal breathing and mouth breathing.
Because the experiment was to actually close.
No, wait. My
Sorry.
view
Okay.
is a bit different. I remember you telling me about the experiment that you were going to do,
Okay.
and I thought, oh, what a great idea! And I thought of the guy who ate McDonald's for a month.
Supersize Me.
Yeah. I thought it was a bit similar to that. But then a few months later, you asked me, hey, do you want to join? And I said, no, absolutely not. But I'm way too curious to not join. So
Is it
I also wanted the experience, yeah.
Is it proper to ask, like, what did you have to pay this?
Oh my God.
You know, what did this experiment cost you? Can I ask you?
Ridiculously expensive. I don't remember the exact amount. I think it was something like, for each person, $8,000.
Yeah, $8,000.
$8,000.
$9,000. And so that is, obviously, you get 40 people in this experiment. Who's going to pay for this? No, the answer is nobody, and they were very clear about that. Nayak cut us some deals. It would have been a lot more expensive had he not. And we were able to actually use Stanford and all their facilities to do the blood work, do the pulmonary function test, do the blood gases, all of that. And then we created our own little lab at
back
the house.
home, right?
So the experiment was set up. It's 10 days mouth breathing, 10 days nasal breathing.
So 10
recording.
days mouth breathing, meaning you actually...
24/7, yeah.
24/7 for 10
all
days
day
straight.
long, all day
So
long,
you plugged your nose, you put up some plastic stuff.
Everything we
inside?
could find.
Everything, anything around. Try that. I'm going to jam that. Cotton, tape, earplugs worked pretty well. You had some good ones. So you really like the silicone earplugs. So your nostrils were just starting to flare out, just filled with silicone. And then tape on top of it at night was a pretty good one.
Your social life must have been amazing these days.
Well, yeah, going out to restaurants and look like an alien.
Look like complete idiots. And a lot of that got cut from the book. I remember we were at this one restaurant and the waiter was just thought we got matching nose jobs. I was like, if this is the result of a nose job, then man, that surgeon should be fired. So people didn't know what was going on. And it was embarrassing because you're also talking like this all the time. And we were just like exhausted. It was beyond all the laughs. The first couple of days we're like, this is pretty funny. It was so bad. It's so awful, really bad.
You describe it pretty well in the book, but I'm thinking that there must be sections here during those 10 days that are left out, because I also get that there's a rising tension between the two of you. I mean, am I fantasizing right now? Or?
I thought we kept it together pretty
We definitely
well.
did, but we weren't at our peak state, right? I mean,
No.
we were definitely exhausted, both of us. And I mean, the last day at Stanford, after 10 days with mouth breathing, and I remember you didn't like the needle, right? When we were measuring
and that's how they measure blood gases. It's not a needle in here, it's right on your wrist.
Yeah, and they have to go to the arteries. The veins are much, you can access them more easily. The arteries, they are deeper. So it hurts. And they need to analyze it within 15 minutes, right? The CO2 blood gas.
Yeah, this is the reason they do it, in order to measure your CO2 levels.
Yes. And then they came back and told James, sorry, it was a failure. You have to do it again.
Yeah, I was not happy about that. I think that's the one time where it really blew it. I was like, what the hell am I doing with my, why can't I write about puppies or birds or something? So there was a lot of questioning about my life choices. But we had made it to that. I said, if I can just get through this awful 8 hours at Stanford again with these tests, which, I mean, they've been conducting tests this way there's other ways of collecting information on CO2, but there's the standard protocol. We're going to stick a needle in your wrist. with all the technological advances, you just start wondering, you're like, what is this system that we're all in? I think you were questioning that too.
Yeah.
But we thought, just if we can make it through this day, the next 10 days aren't going to be fun because we have to eat the same thing, walk the same amount of steps, but at least we're going to be nasal breathing.
Yeah.
At least we can be breathing the way humans are supposed to breathe.
Because this was the second part of the experiment. You did the 10 days, you did all your blood work, and you did also the measurements that you described pretty funnily in your home studio, in your home lab. Was it back in your house, like in your living room?
Yeah, I have 2 floors, 2 different units on my house. So I took the whole downstairs unit, became a lab, and I lived down there and slept down there and was just down there. And Anders was right across the street, so he could walk over in his socks, and we could just do 3 times a day do the testing.
So you did like oximeter and pulse and all kinds
a lot
of
of
stuff.
things: balance, eyesight. We did push-ups and measured our HRV. We stood on one leg. We measured CO2 and nitric oxide in our nose, and so it took like
urine test, pH test. I mean,
an hour 3 times per day.
Yeah,
so that was pretty intense. Yeah.
So I'm just curious, like, okay, you all the stuff you did at home, that was of course on your own risk, but the medical waiver form you had to sign at Stanford because before Dr. Nayak would do any work on you, I can just imagine that he would don't want to be associated with any of the risks that you guys were taking. Did you have to fill out the form? I'm risking my life and I'm aware of it?
I don't know if it was life risking, and I want to make very clear that I did not ever view this as a Supersize Me jackass stunt. I viewed this as, okay, we're going to personally experience what so many people are experiencing all the time. If you look at the people suffering from chronic sinusitis, who have plugged noses, who have severely deviated septums, such a large percentage of the population is breathing through the mouth anyway. And they have these downstream problems of headaches and gut issues and fatigue issues and all of this. So we were just putting ourselves, who not mouth breathers, into the state of someone being a mouth and measuring it. That's all we were doing.
Yeah.
Right?
It's like giving them a voice or almost
absolutely. Absolutely.
And I just wanted to also touch upon, I remember you mentioning to me, Anders, that on the last few days of that mouth breathing period, those 10 days, you actually started to be disoriented. Like you were walking in the neighborhood and you couldn't find your way back to the apartment.
I mean, your park is like 100 meters away from your house, right? I couldn't find my way home. It was so ridiculous. Yeah, but it was several times where I felt really, really stupid, like...
less intelligent?
Indeed, less intelligent. That's exactly the word. And it was really interesting to notice this journey. It was like I was traveling back in time to where my previous life, not necessarily the less intelligent, but the more stressed, the more adrenaline. So I remember my blood work told me that my adrenaline levels were 300% higher after the 10 days of mouth breathing. And my dopamine, which also was very clear, I needed to reward myself more. My sugar cravings really went up really high.
Yeah, you told me about your diet over those last few days. That wasn't actually peas and carrots.
It was no, it wasn't. It was sugar. It was chocolate, ice cream, pizza, beer.
What about your diet during those 10 days?
Well, we had to, whatever we ate in the first 10 days, we had to repeat the next 10 days.
Yeah.
I was so specific about this. Like, we really had to eat the same thing. So it's true that data was less important to me because it's subjective, right? Oh, I have a sugar craving. Any scientist would be like, that doesn't mean anything. However, when you personally experience it, you really do. When you're constantly in sympathetic mode and you're stressed out, you really crave sugar. And it's a reward for feeling so bad. It gives you that little rush for that moment that you want to repeat that because your life is miserable. Like, life was not worth living. I really mean that by mouth breathing that way. It was terrible. And just look at the sleep if you need any hard proof. Look at what happens to your sleep by changing the pathway in which you breathe, period. And who's talking about that? Nobody.
So tell me about this. That's a big one. What happened to the sleep of your guys, like during those 10 days?
It was terrible.
Yeah.
So we started from not snoring, not having sleep apnea,
Yeah.
to snoring. The first day wasn't so bad. It increased from me basically 4 minutes a night, which was a lot for me, to about an hour and a half. But a few days in, I was snoring the vast majority of from 0 to full-on snoring, just through mouth breathing.
Yeah. No, yeah, for me, I went from 0 to 3 hours in general per night. And we filmed ourselves. So we recorded the sound, but we also filmed ourselves. And you could see how we were twisting and turning. And I came to the point where I literally didn't want to go to sleep, because I knew this is going to be such a horrible experience.
So for just those listening who don't really understand what's the problem of snoring, you might keep your spouse awake, but what's actually happening physiologically?
Well, again, it means that you have narrow airways. So you're forcing the air higher up in your chest. You're forcing the air higher up in your chest. And that, again, then you're in the stress loop. High chest breathing means you're moving into the sympathetic state.
Right, so you're more stressed while you're trying to rest during the night.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense, right? You should try to be in the parasympathetic state,
right,
so that you are calm and can heal and repair and recover.
So I'm guessing snoring and deep sleep isn't really combinable. If you're snoring, you're probably not getting that deep sleep that's so restorative.
Probably not.
Probably not. So, okay, so that's the 10 days. It's horrible. And all the results, all the measurements, the deep arteria, blood proving shows the same, and your own experiments at home. And then you turn over to 10 days of nasal breathing. How does that shift, like from the 10th day of mouth breathing to the first day of nasal breathing? How do you experience that?
Well, we knew it was going to be different. We had read the research that it was going to be different. We had experienced ourselves the difference between mouth breathing and nasal breathing in short amounts of time, right? You can just shut your mouth, breathe through your nose, breathe through your mouth, and you can feel that. But I'd never done this for an extended amount of time. So it was really night and day. I'm not going to say that the first day you're reacclimating to this. So we had a bunch of gunk in our noses, and it took a while to really clear that out. But the proof is in the data. I mean, you look at what happened to snoring within a single night. I went from a maximum of 4 hours a night to 28 minutes, and a couple of days later it was 0, like back to 0, just by switching the pathway through which you breathe. And beyond that, athletic performance increased, fatigue generally went away almost entirely. I mean, it was a transformative difference for me. And again, don't listen to my subjective experience, just look at the numbers.
Yeah, for me it was already actually the first morning. When I looked at the snore data, I think it was almost 0 already the first night with taped mouth and good old nasal breathing. And I remember waking up already there the first morning. My energy was probably 11 from a scale from 1 to 10, and I just couldn't stop smiling. It was really like night and day.
So I would be very worried about my loss of taste. You know, when your nose is clogged, you don't taste the food. Like, was it possible to taste anything at all? Do you remember?
Yeah, it was, because some scents are able to travel up through the sinus cavities, not just here. Right. A lot of that taste was greatly diminished, but I remember being able to taste food. It was not very enjoyable because it's harder to swallow that way as well. Mm.
So the reason also I'm bringing in food, I mean, we talked about your background as a journalist, and me myself being from Norway. I know you also traveled to Norway years ago with a group of crazy surfers to ride the waves of Lofoten. Mm-hmm. And I noticed in your article that you had a pretty interesting diet. So I brought to both of you a little something. For you guys listening, they're now opening a small thing from Norway.
Wow, this is quite a surprise. I did not know you were going to go in this direction right now. Did you?
No, not at all.
He said I could be in charge of this.
So it's not fermented
Oh, awesome. That's fantastic.
So this is what we in Norway call klassisk tørrfisk.
Okay.
So this is, of course, James, you've tasted this before. So do you want to tell us about this?
Yes, it's extremely chewy and it tastes like the ocean. And I quite enjoyed this. I basically subsisted on this. And you have this waffle thing going on, and which you can just eat at any time. It's not like it's dedicated to morning, noon. You can just pour yourself a waffle anytime. And I just thought that was the most wonderful thing, wherever you went, eating waffles.
So what this is dried cod.
Mm-hmm.
And it, of course, you're so welcome. It's made famous through, of course, the Spanish bacalao, the Portuguese bacalao, of course. But so the reason also I'm bringing this up, because there is a link between how we breathe and how we eat. Our diet and our breathing is actually connected. Do you want to touch upon this, Anders?
Yeah, a few examples. I mean, if you eat like a lot of people do, we eat too much. When you fill up the stomach, that will affect your ability to breathe. It's harder for the diaphragm to work if you eat a lot. So that will force up the breathing higher up in the chest. So what it's called, sympathetic is called fight and flight, and parasympathetic, another name for that is rest and digest. So when we digest food, we should preferably not be in fight flight, right? But that is what this high chest breathing takes us in. So that makes it harder to absorb the nutrients in the food we eat and break down the food. And another thing is the diaphragm, when it moves up and down in this rhythmic way when we breathe, it stimulates the digestion, stimulates the intestines. If you see videos of the diaphragm working, it's amazing the double function that the diaphragm have, or many other functions actually too. But definitely on the digestive.
So it actually helps to push the food physically through the digestive tract further down in your body.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So you also mentioned in the book that there is a resemblance between overbreathing and overeating. That during the last 30 years we see, of course, the obesity epidemic, shooting through everywhere in the world. And at the same time, we can probably have this theory that people have started overbreathing in the same period. Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's harder to gauge because we can't go back in time and look at how much people are breathing, and even overbreathing is a hard thing to really measure. But with the few studies that are available, it does appear that people are breathing more. And one interesting fact that I learned from a few pulmonologists who had been in the game for a long time is they were taught that the normal respiratory rate was 8 to 12 breaths per minute when they were in school, in 60s and 70s, 8 to 12 breaths per minute.
I have the same info from other sources.
And you can see this in medical texts. What is considered normal now is 12 to 18.
12 to 18, right?
That's a big difference.
It is.
So my hunch is, and again, we can't prove this, but you can put all the pieces of this puzzle together, and it appears that people are breathing more now than they were, thinking that overbreathing is giving them more oxygen. But as Anders has studied for years and years, the opposite is happening when you are overbreathing. It makes it harder for your body to upload.
So just to bring this to the food, right? I mean, this dried cod, that's pretty chewy. You have to work pretty long in order to swallow that thing. And your jaw needs to work, and your palate is involved, and your tongue needs to do this, right? And the digestion probably starts in your mouth when all the enzymes and stuff is released. And you also mentioned this in your book, how we ate so differently far back in our time, right? When our diets didn't consist of smoothies and pre-chewed food, right? How has that affected our digestive and also our breathing muscles?
Well, there's a reason why our ancestors all had straight teeth, why they all had these prognathic, very powerful profiles. And a lot of people, for some reason, still don't believe this. All you have to do is look at the skeletal record and you can see it if you don't believe me, if you think I'm making this up. And there's a reason why 90% of us have some sort of deformation in our mouths, why we all seem to have crooked teeth because our mouths are so small. So there's been research into this for more than 100 years, and vitamins and minerals play some bit in that, but it's mostly chewing stress. If when you are young and developing, if you don't have vigorous chewing stress, your muscles and your skeleton will not develop properly, period. And that makes perfect sense. It's like, if you're not running around all the time, if you're just sitting around, then your legs aren't going to develop properly. If you never use your hands, then it's the same thing with your face and all of these muscles and all of these bones.
So if you only eat ultra-processed foods, Anders, pre-chewed food, like I like to call them.
Yeah, baby food.
Baby foods. What happens to our breathing muscles?
Well, it gets narrow. You don't develop this area fully, and that can then lead to problems in the throat area. And also, a lot of these ultra-processed foods, they have a lower pH, and that's an interesting correlation between low pH food will drive faster breathing, because when we exhale carbon dioxide, it affects the pH in our body. So they really are tied together. If you have a fast breathing, you will have more cravings for low pH food, like basically junk food. And vice versa, if you eat junk food, you will start to overbreathe in order to compensate, in order for the body to maintain the right pH balance.
Right. So then we're into this negative loop. That will just get worse and worse.
Yeah.
So actually, by changing our breath and changing our diet probably at the same time, we can actually change the way our face looks. Like if it...
Specifically,
Absolutely.
if we are kids, it's harder when we are adults, but for a lot of kids, that's the natural resting position for the tongue is in the roof of the mouth, and when we do that, we stimulate the maxilla and the development of the maxilla. And when you look at, there is this famous drawing. It's called a homunculus. Do you know that guy? They make a drawing of the body parts and their representation in the brain. And obviously, the hands, they are huge. The feet are big. The genitals are big. But secondly, after the hands comes our tongue and our lips. So when we have our mouth open, when the tongue doesn't rest in the roof of the mouth, then we're basically telling the brain that it's like squeezing our hands, telling us, okay, there is stress, I have to be alert. So that's a reason why kids, they want to suck the thumb, or they want to have pacifiers.
Right, which reminds me of this other great story that we were just talking about the other day as well. How you also mentioned that in the native societies, there are actually traditions that shows that they go around and close the mouths of the little babies, or just right after they have been given milk from their mothers. The mother would make sure to seal or to close their jaw so that their lips are tight. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about that research.
Not only that, but they were acutely aware of their breathing all the time. And so that practice of shutting a kid's lips, especially with an infant, would just train them to become nasal breathers, as well as breastfeeding. When you're breastfeeding all day, the only way to breathe is through the nose, right? So once you go from that and then train an infant to keep their mouth shut, they will default to nasal breathing, which is exactly what you want to do. They even went so far as to build these little beds for infants. Don't do this at home, okay? I don't think this would be too accepted nowadays. That were this flat board, and they would put the infant on this flat board because they said it allowed them to hold their mouths shut when they were sleeping at night and allowed them to have a more handsome profile later on. Is that true? There will never be studies in that, but it's interesting that they thought it was so important that they went as far as doing that. I don't think it's a coincidence that Native American tribes were the tallest humans to have ever walked the earth, as far as we know. 7 feet tall, some tribes were.
Right. And since we're in Scandinavia, we met a woman just a few weeks ago who also had some Samic ancestors. And when she had her baby, the Samic grandmother would come over and close the baby's mouth.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, so Samic, that's an indigenous...
The indigenous people of Northern Europe, right? Which shows that these techniques that you refer to from the Native American tribes, they were actually known and are still known in the elder generations in the Samic population in Norway.
And to me, it makes perfect sense. And the same researcher who was looking at Native American tribes in North America went down to South America, and they followed the exact same procedures.
And of course, if you would look at their teeth, they would be
perfectly straight.
Yeah, because they are formed around the tongue. So if the tongue is not resting in the roof of the mouth, then the muscles of the lip and the cheeks will push the teeth inwards, right? And then there will not be enough room. Plus, so, when you add the baby food, when we're not chewing enough.
So the Native Americans and the Samic people, they wouldn't need braces in order to have...
Probably not.
None of us needed braces. This is the deal. We didn't need wisdom teeth extracted. We didn't need any orthodontics to straighten our teeth. We had straight teeth, just like every other animal. So this idea that braces are just this default now for kids, I had braces, extractions, all that stuff, is ridiculous, because a few hundred years ago, we didn't need them.
Right. So who should we blame?
You can blame whoever you want. I don't know if this is a blame game. It's just a realization of what has happened. And once you understand the core issues, you can then fix it. And that's what it's all about.
The word you mentioned the other day as well, which makes me kind of, I don't know, sad, is probably the word disevolution. That we're actually going in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
Americans, the life expectancy has lowered.
Yeah. Isn't that great? With all the technological advancements in medicine, life expectancy is still going down.
Going down.
It's insane.
After, of course, increasing for a number of years.
Yeah,
and now
doubling. It's going down.
I had to check for Sweden and Norway. We haven't still gotten to that tipping point yet. But we are following as fast as we can, running after you guys in the US. We will be in the disevolution.
Why?
Yeah, that's a good question. But we definitely, we follow your culture.
I come out here though, and I don't see it. go to an airport in the Midwest of America. It looks vastly different than things are out here.
Okay.
So you're doing something right.
So what we could do, Anders, we could blame the Americans because they always start with the...
No, I don't like the blame game either.
Sorry, okay, but
I blame the Americans, absolutely.
So let's go even further. We talked about the native tribes. I want to take us all the way back to Aristotle. He said... Because aren't you agree that there is some philosophical part of breathing?
Sure.
Yeah.
So Aristotle said, we become what we consistently do. Excellent, therefore, is not an act, but a habit. You probably heard this quote before.
I haven't. I love that. I'm sure some corporations have co-opted that and put it on some poster above workers, but stripping that away, that's beautiful.
That is a beautiful quote. So our excellence is not an act, but is a result of our habits.
Indeed.
Which, of course, brings us to the topic. I'm holding you guys now to the table. What are your breathing rituals or your habits, Anders? Please.
Well, I tape my mouth still at night. I do. I do physical activity almost exclusively with nasal breathing. I used to be very competitive. Some say I may still be a little bit competitive, but when I do exercise, I have this idea that I don't go harder, push myself more than my nose can deal with. So that's what I do, and I use my little relaxator.
Oh, I'm glad you brought that. We're going to talk about that in just a bit.
Yeah.
Hold on to that.
And of course, the breathing awareness. Sometimes I still consider myself a beginner, because when we engage in life, when I'm sitting there at the computer or looking at my mobile and getting focused and concentrating, I still have this tendency to hold my breath. It's not that easy to keep to these low, slow, rhythmical breaths when we live our daily life in this society where we have stimuli coming at us all the time and exposed to all these, I guess, delicious food that may not be the best for our body. I think a lot of our society is structured around satisfying our brain. Our body doesn't necessarily want to run a marathon or drink 5 beers or have tight deadlines. It may be a construct to deliver adrenaline to our brain, or dopamine, or whatever we are addicted to.
What about your routines, James?
Mm-hmm. I think at the beginning every morning I wake up and put on my robe, and then I have a bunch of beads, and I spend about 2 hours using special oils, and then I sit in complete darkness for about 6 hours and practice on my breathing and focus on a deity, and that's pretty much my day. Then I go to sleep. Yeah, so.
And then you post a selfie on Instagram.
Yeah, all the time, usually shirtless. I've got my abs oiled up, and I look pretty impressive. So a lot of people think that when you spend years and years writing a book on breathing, yes, you do become a complete neurotic, especially when you're recording your breathing, when you have wearables looking at your oxygen, when you're looking at your heart rate variability, you're trying to find that perfect breath. But I'm a journalist, so I'm a researcher, and once I go deeply into a field, I have the luxury of leaving a lot of that behind. And I usually do, because out of necessity, you have to get on with the next assignment. However, with this book and this research, I felt such a profound transformation from changing my own breathing habits and learning so much about it that, of course, I breathe differently now. And of course, it's completely changed me. And of course, I use a number of different practices. I'm not consistent, doesn't start every single day with the same thing. I like some mornings to start off with some Kundalini or some vigorous breath work. But what's even more important is how you're breathing throughout the day, and especially at night. I use sleep tape every single night and throughout the day. And while exercising, I am not breathing through my mouth ever. It just doesn't happen unless I consciously go,
Right.
which is perfectly fine.
So what you're both saying is that at least there is an awareness.
Yeah, but not just as you. I don't follow any strict routines. I think that is counterproductive. I think at the end of the day, I want to be happy and harmonious, and if I have too many of these must do, it will take me actually further away from that.
And I think that the point, and Anders would probably agree on this, is to really work hard on establishing good habits so that becomes your unconscious default.
Right. Yes.
I don't want to be thinking about this stuff throughout the day. A lot of people are like, oh, so now I'm thinking about my diet, thinking about my kids, thinking about exercise. Now to think about breathing, what a hassle. Right. It's like, do the work at the beginning, figure out a way that is positive for you to sustain healthy breathing habits. It's like a diet when people do these crash diets, then come out and gain more weight than they had before. It's ridiculous. Develop good habits so that you're just not, I'm not thinking about closing my mouth anymore. It doesn't happen. I spent a couple months doing that. It just doesn't happen. I don't do anything with an open mouth.
I love that you put in your willpower to create the habit or create then it becomes second nature.
Yes.
That's the key. Yeah.
Goes down back to the subconscious thing. You just do it as a habit. I love that. So in your book, I wish I could read the whole thing aloud. Everyone should just buy it, of course, or download the Audible. And is your book available as an Audible?
No, it's not.
You should. Yeah. With your calming voice, Anders, record.
Any day.
So, you write in the book that a study of 5,000 people show that the greatest indicator of lifespan wasn't genetics or diet or the amount of exercise, it was lung capacity. Who would have guessed, right? In other words, that larger lungs equals longer lives. And one reason being that larger lungs allows us to get more air in with fewer breaths. Have you tested your lung capacity, James?
I wish I would have, a number of years ago, looked at my lung capacity then and now. But I was introduced to the power of conscious breathing through freediving and through hanging out with freedivers. And that's when I noticed really transformational effects to other areas of my health, not just my ability to dive longer, bigger gas tank, the longer you can stay down. So free divers are all obsessed with expanding your rib cage, having this be very flexible so that you can take this enormous breath in effortlessly. But what you notice once you do that, and what is yoga but stretching and breathing? It's the same thing that what freedivers are training for. Once you do that, you notice how effortless breathing is the rest of the day, and especially at night, how effortless it becomes. Because if you have larger lungs, you can take fewer breaths. It's less effort to get more energy. You think that's not going to make a difference for your sleep quality or your athletic ability or even for calmness? Of course it is. So that's how I came to it, and I'm sure my lung capacity has increased. And this is the great thing, is that even if we're born with small lungs and we're told that, oh, we only have a certain lung capacity, we can change this at any time in your life.
What about you, Anders? Have you tested your lung capacity?
No, I haven't either, except for I think we did it at Stanford, didn't we?
Yeah, if you, I wasn't a huge fan of these tests where they shoot you up with bronchodilators and it felt so
that
unnatural.
protocol, it wasn't fully natural. No, I agree with that. But no, apart from that, I haven't really.
So, is it like male have 6 liters and women have a little less, 5? Is that the numbers?
Yeah, something like that.
So, but also an indicator, like you touched upon with the freedivers, you can measure it by seeing how long you can naturally hold your breath. Is that a way to measure your lung capacity?
That's more looking at blood oxygen levels and your respiratory health than lung capacity. You need proper measurements to be able. How much can you exhale? How much is that reserve volume? You know, so you'll need a machine to do that.
You can't do that at home. Not like blowing up a balloon and check that out. That doesn't help. So that's why I wanted to touch upon another one of your inventions, Anders, relaxator, which sounds like an enticing device. Do you mind showing us one of your...
No, absolutely.
Wouldn't you say that this would be a fantastic tool to increase your lung capacity?
In my view, when we think about lung capacity, it's not only about, expanding the rib cage, it's also the understanding that CO2 has this relaxing and widening effect on the smooth muscles surrounding the airways. So if you increase the carbon dioxide in your lungs, as well as if you're breathing through the nose so that the inhaled air is spiked with nitric oxide, which also has similar effect to CO2, it helps to open up the airways. So if you do nasal breathing and low and slow breathing, that is, in my view, the key to get a better lung function.
So for those listening, let me just explain what we're looking at here. It's a small thing. I often call it, what's the name in English? Not a nap, but...
The pacifier?
Like it looks like kind of an adult pacifier.
Indeed, it looks kind of silly, doesn't it?
So it looks like a whistle or a pacifier, and it's attached to this long thing that you can have it around your neck.
Yeah, lanyard, yeah.
And there's an adjustable thing that you can put, change the pressure from 1 to 5, and this is done on the exhale.
Yeah, you inhale through the nose and exhale through the relaxator,
So breathing in through your nose and then breathing out. So this just increases the, the pressure.
Well, it prolongs
resistance.
It gives you a resistance in the out-breath, so it prolongs the exhale slightly. And that means that you are able to, on the following in-breath, your breathing will be lower. It's basically a diaphragm activator, and you increase the pressure in your lungs and you increase the pressure in your sinus cavities, which means that the air will circulate better.
So you mentioned, have you tried this thing, James, the relaxator?
Not only have I tried it, but I bought probably 2 dozen of them.
2 dozen.
I am not sponsored by Relaxator, everybody. But I have found that this thing is so helpful. I've tried all these other expiratory muscle training. Anders is not paying me to say this. I just want to be very, very clear. I've tried a bunch of them, This one by far works the best, and I love how it's so small. I have one right in my office. I use it all the time. I travel with one as well, and I've given them to dozens and dozens of people.
So now we got an explanation of what happens to us physiologically, but what happens to us? How does it feel? Why do you use it? Why?
Because your breathing patterns can become dysfunctional if you're in states of acute focus or in stress. And I've noticed that this helps restore and maintain that natural rhythm. A lot of people say, I thought you were just talking about how breathing through your mouth was really bad news. It's bad news because there's no resistance when I'm exhaling through my mouth. This is causing resistance. So a lot of that humidity and pressure that you're not getting from breathing without any resistance is restored. I wish there was a study looking at using pursed-lipped breathing versus breathing through the nose. I'm sure there might be a few other benefits to exhaling through the nose, but I bet most of those benefits are restored when you're Ujjayi breathing.
Ujjayi breathing, right.
Even, that's why so many practices, ancient yoga practices, but also practices for anxiety and for asthma.
Right.
What is that doing but holding that breath in, allowing you to get more oxygen, allowing you to become more relaxed? This does that for you, and it very easily fits in your mouth. So whenever I'm heading into a very complex work problem, I usually put that in just to sort of restore my breathing.
So what you're saying, this book would probably not have been written if it hadn't been for the relaxator.
It would have been written, but extremely poorly. Now, I don't know. This sounds like if another device comes out that's better than this, sorry, Anders, I'll be talking about that. But I've tried probably a dozen of these things. They're usually this big, the size of a shoehorn. They're very uncomfortable. I like this one. If someone else likes something better, if someone wants to breathe through pursed lips, that's cool too.
Yeah. But I love the fact what we're doing right now. We're sharing information that is available for everyone. And I mean, we're not talking about $1,000 investments here. We're talking about a few bucks that can actually increase. I mean, we talked about the same. When I started doing it, I was so, excited. So I did it all the time. And driving and doing this, I wouldn't do it because I became a little bit, I did it for too long, so I felt a little bit sleepy.
You became tired. Yeah, that's not wise when you're driving.
No, and especially when you're a beginner. As a newbie and just trying to breathe, that was, no, but now, like you say, deep focus work, writing, concentrating, fantastic.
Yeah.
So,
thank you for your kind words, but I couldn't agree more. I'm not here to sell this stuff, right? I'm just noticing as well the benefits. So I'm surprised to these days still that, wow, now when I have a tight deadline or whatever and I put it in my mouth and I'm able to be really focused, it's really nice.
So we are about to wrap up, even though I could really definitely spend the rest of this week sitting here talking to you guys. But so what's the link between surfing in the north of Norway, going deep, freediving, now exploring the grottos in Paris, looking at skulls, meeting this crazy Swede, going into breathing. What's the link here? What's the longer story? What's the story arch, so to say, between all of these projects?
I wish there was a plan. I wish I could show you a big graph of this is how I'm going to live my life, and this is all of the different subjects I'm going to be exploring. I have no idea what 1 year is going to lead to. But what I do, and what I've been so lucky to do after working pretty hard for a number of decades, is to choose subjects that fascinate me. Right. If you are spending 24 hours a day becoming obsessed with something, you better like that subject and be interested in it. Otherwise, writing is the stupidest thing you could ever do. I mean, there's so many easier jobs, stress-free jobs, probably make you a lot happier, but this allows me to wake up every day and be curious. And I'm curious about a lot of things. And I talk to everybody, even though people like the experts say, why would you talk to that person? He doesn't have a PhD. My job is to try to find the truth behind subjects. And oftentimes that truth is hidden in the cracks. And you have to be willing to go through those cracks and deal with hearing 99% complete BS to find that 1% that can open up a door to something unexpected. So that's the funnest part of my job. I absolutely love it. It's definitely not for everybody. Actually, it's not for most people.
No, probably not. So I'm also curious because you mentioned the other day that since this book was published in May of 2020, of course, more research has come your way, and there are things you know now that had you known before publishing, you probably would have included that in the book. Could you mention a few of those nuggets that you now have learned that you weren't aware of at the time of publishing?
Sure. So science is always changing and it's always progressing, and you have to be flexible enough to change your viewpoints as things progress. There's no end point to science, right? And the moment that you think there is, you're no longer a scientist. Right. You're a religious zealot that is only able or only wanting to think within a particular box. So I've had the pleasure and privilege of continuing conversations with a lot of the researchers in the book, including a bunch of new researchers. So I'm still doing this research and probably never write about it. It's something that I'm very interested in. I'm helping to boot up a couple new studies right now just because I think they'd be interesting.
Yeah.
But one thing I do wish I would have written more about, that I've learned a lot about from speaking at conferences and talking to experts, is sleep disorder breathing in kids. I mentioned it a little bit in the book, ADHD, sleep problems, chewing, sleep problems. But what I've learned is there is a huge epidemic with kids that is going to destroy a lot more people's lives than any other disease out right now. Sleep disorder breathing is just wrecking people's lives.
So I know also from your work, Anders, that when you have the testimonials from the kids and the young adults and the boy who was 13 who definitely changed his entire life just by doing some of your easy exercises, tell us, like, how does that affect you, knowing that you can positively create an impact for the coming generation?
Oh, that's the most beautiful gift. And just going back to myself, I think that is what I would have wanted more than anything else. That tool, that knowledge, that ability to, because my racing mind was there with me since as long as I can remember. And I found it often very hard to get out of it. So I can really relate to those kids, and it's fantastic when they share their stories, how such simple things, such simple knowledge can actually have such a huge impact.
Yeah. You know, I have kids myself, and I sometimes go over and tape their mouths while they're sleeping. No, I haven't. No, I have invited, and they've tried it, both of them. You know, they haven't really gotten the hang of it, but at least they're curious. And I know a lot of kids now, among my friends' kids, and one young boy, he has an asthma problem, and he has benefited greatly from it. And another one who was addicted to, what do you call it, nasal sprays. She could quit the nasal spraying after just taping her mouth at night.
Very bad for the world economy, what we're saying here.
Right.
So keep using those sprays. You don't have to use them, just keep buying them, keep people employed. We're all going to be okay.
Since you bring this up, imagine the medical industry. If people would do these techniques, we could only guess how much,
But people won't, and here's a very important distinction here, is I want to allow people to have choices and options. I think Anders is in the same boat here. You can never force anyone to do anything. And what I've found is the majority of people do not want to be bothered with this stuff, which is perfectly fine. They don't want to change their diet. They don't want to exercise. They don't want to change their breathing. That is fine with me. I'm not going to judge anyone for anything. But if they don't have an option, if they do want to change these things, that is wrong. They should have an option to be like, there's another way of doing this that you may benefit from. Might be a little more work, but the outcome will be much more favorable. Make your choice. I think we have that choice with food now. You'd be hard-pressed to find people who think eating McDonald's every day is good for you. Eating candy bars every day is good for you. That's how it was when I was growing up. These foods are fine. We now know that those foods are crap. Right. And so you have good food and bad food. People still make the wrong choices all the time. Right. Completely fine with me.
So now we know that dried carb is an alternative.
I am just salivating looking at this. It's been so long, and this is from Lofoten.
Right. right.
So a place I hold in my heart.
We have our lunch here, right?
So
Beautiful.
We will wrap this up by going into the topic that we now have warmed up to coming into. We talked about kids, so let's talk about creating those kids, right? Sex life. Are you ready for this?
Sure.
No. I did not know this was where we were going.
Of course you didn't. So that's what happens when we're given all the permission to take this wherever I wanted to. So let's talk about sex. Because at least you, Anders, claim that breathing can impact your sex life.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, all from my own experience. Now, there are studies. For example, one very interesting study. They took a group of people with nasal polyps, which means they have a really hard time to breathe through their nose. So they're breathing through their mouth, and in that group, 34% had sexual dysfunction problem, and in the control group, only I think 2%. And when this group with nasal polyps, they removed the polyps so they could start to breathe through their nose, it went down to 11%. So they got a better sex life, and one explanation is, I mean, to be sexually aroused is more like the parasympathetic state. Mouth breathing automatically takes you more into the sympathetic.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you're stressed, it's not very good, foundation to have a good sex life.
No, and another aspect is the Viagra drug. It works. That's the sex enhancement drug, right? And
don't ask me. I've never used it actually.
Okay, well, me neither. But the reason why it works is because it boosts the production of nitric oxide, which we have a lot of receptors around our genitals. And when they bind to these receptors, the muscles relax so that the genitals can be filled with blood, and we get sexually aroused. So nitric oxide produced in the nose, and Viagra works by producing more nitric oxide.
So, I mean, it's obvious, right? Sex is an interesting topic. It's important. It's vital for our being here. So what did you find around this science around breathing and sex?
I'm going to answer that question with a few questions of my own that I've wondered about, that were cut from the book. So why is it that perverts always pant? How you doing? So it turns out that to get sexually in the mood, to get stimulated, is a parasympathetic response. You have to be calm. You can't be super jacked up like that. But an orgasm is a sympathetic response.
Indeed.
Which is why when people are together and doing that act, the breathing tends to be very slow at the beginning, and then it speeds up. Guess what happens when your breathing speeds up?
Right. Mouth breathing.
You're getting to
including mouth breathing. So a lot of mouth breathing. So there are pieces of this puzzle. I haven't quite put this together. This would be the real bestseller, like breathing and sex. It's never going to happen. But think about these patterns. And perverts, from what I've heard, they cannot function sexually. That's why they're so frustrated.
Right.
I think they go from 0 to 100 within a second, because they're...
Yeah, so basically then, if we want to last longer as men than the average, 3 seconds or whatever, if we can keep that calmer breathing a little longer, right? Okay,
now I see. Sorry, I was just putting in some suggestions on rebranding your sleep tape. What about calling it just sex tape?
Sex tape. So, and also, I know you're done with this topic, but I have one other thing I need to talk about. So when you think about when people come together, it's like, hey, baby, how you doing? They start kissing. Start breathing slowly. You're kissing, you're breathing through your nose, you're humming. What does that do? It increases your nitric oxide 15-fold. That was done at Karolinska.
Yeah.
These studies were, what happens when your nitric oxide increases? Blood vessels open, blood is able to go where. So I think the math adds up there. What do you think, Anders?
100%.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's your answer.
I love it. And people will think that we have talked before we sat down here, because what I wanted to close with is what you write in the appendix of your book about nose singing, also called humming, which you just touched upon, right? So you mentioned, Anders, and I will just read from this book, nitric oxide is a powerhouse molecule that widens capillaries, increases oxygenation, and relaxes the smooth muscles, like you mentioned, right?
Yeah.
Humming increases the release of nitric oxide in the nasal passage 15-fold. There is the most effective and simple method for increasing this essential gas, which is breathe normally through the nose and hum any song or sound. Practice for at least 5 minutes a day, more if possible. So what I want you now to do is I will invite you to hum a song with me as a closure of this podcast.
Can we hum Ace of Bases, All She Wants Is Another Baby, and that would tie into the sexual dysfunction, and the whole thing would just be come together in this beautiful way?
We can't. You have to do that on your own, because I have a song that we are going to hum together.
Okay.
Not the Norwegian natural song,
No,
please.
I would love you actually to hear you humming Ace of Base, All That She Wants.
It's not good.
Because you also have a background as a musician. There's so many stuff we haven't even touched upon. You did not play Ace of Base music, though. You were more into...
You don't know that about me. Maybe I did.
You were more into punk rock, weren't you?
What song was this that we were going to be humming?
So I will suggest a song that I know that everyone in the audience, wherever they're watching or listening, will hum along with us. Are you ready for this challenge?
Okay, yeah.
I'm so ready for this challenge.
So before we close off, I want us to hum along for The Sound of Silence with Simon and Garfunkel.
The guitar part or the singing melody?
We will start with the beginning.
The guitar part? Any more specific, the bass line or the drums or the piano?
You start with the guitar line and we will jump in when the melody starts.
Okay, you ready?
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, James.
Thank you, Anders. Thank you, Sweden.
Yeah.